So the test cut turned out to be so good that I don't think it makes sense to run through that again when I cut the pieces for the real box. So I think instead of doing that, why don't we try doing something a little fancier, and I'll cut a center keyed splined box joint. So what does that mean? Well, a center keyed means that the pins on either side of the center are going to be symmetrical, moving out from the center. And the way you do that is you cut the pins moving in from the left side, and then you flip the piece over and cut the pins from the right side so that everything is cut symmetrically. The spline part means that we're going to cut the pins to be smaller than the openings that they fit into so that we can fill the gap with a spline. Now there's a formula for cutting these, and that's provided by INCRA. But basically the formula is whatever your kerf width is, and it has to be a minimum of 1/4 of an inch, but whatever your kerf is, you multiply that by 1.5, and then multiply that number by the number of splines that you want to have plus 1. So in my case, I have a piece that's a little bit more than 4 inches wide. So my kerf is 1/4 of an inch. So 1/4 of an inch times 1.5 multiplied by, and I'm going to choose 10 pins, so multiplied by 10 plus 1, which is 11, and that works out to 4 1/8 inches, 4.125 inches. The wood that I have is a little bit thicker than that. I could do 12 pins. It has to be an even number of pins. I could do 12, but I think 10 is a good number, so I'm going to have to rip the wood to be just a little bit thinner. And I'm going to cheat because I've already got the dado blade set, and I really don't want to mess with the setup currently, so I'm going to use the dado blade to rip this to the appropriate width. So I'll move the box joint jig out of the way temporarily. Just put it on the floor. And then I'll measure 4 1/8 inches. Now, I know that I have the distance between the two pin plates set correctly because we already made a box and the spacing turned out to be very good. But when you're making a spline joint, we want to reduce the distance between the pin plate and the blade by half. So the way we're going to do that is by rotating this micro adjust knob. And INCRA provides this little tool that fits on it to make it easy to count the rotations. Every full rotation is equal to 1/32 of an inch. And I have a 1/4 inch distance between the pin plate and the blade, and I want to reduce that by half. So 1/4 of an inch is 8/32, so I want to go 4/32 to reduce it, and that means I'm going to do 4 full rotations. So I'm going to loosen this knob here and then count 4 rotations. 1, 2, 3, 4. So somewhere about there. Now I can't be certain that's an exact fit, so we're going to do another test cut with the same test piece that we used before. Now I want to cut off these pins and then test fit them into the test cut that I made before. And I'll just break off a couple of them and see how they fit. And I want them to be a little bit loose. And they are a little loose, maybe just a little bit too loose. So I'm going to tighten that up a little bit. And what I'll do is I want these pins to be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to move the pin plate a little bit away from the blade, just a little bit. So I'll do another test cut just to make sure. And now we'll test the cut again. Break a couple of these off. It's a little bit rough. Try it again. Put this one in here. That one in there, and that's a good fit. Okay, so we're ready. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, these are going to be symmetrically cut. So we want 10 splines, 10 pins, and so I'm going to cut in 5 from one side, flip it over, and then cut 5 from the other side.
It's pretty easy to let your mind wander while you're making the cuts from one end, and then you'll have too many cuts made from that end. So you really need to pay attention while doing this. So I made 5 cuts from the first side, and now I'm flipping it over, and I'm going to cut the other 5 cuts from the other side. When setting the position for the adjoining piece, it's just like making a regular box joint, except that you don't have to worry about which edge is the top edge of the box because these joints are being cut symmetrically. So you can use either side of the piece to set it up. Now the first piece has a center key, so when making cuts on the adjoining piece, instead of cutting 5 cuts, I'm going to cut 6 cuts from each side.
All right, now that the box joints are cut, it's time to cut the splines. And I've got 10 splines in every corner, so that's a total of 40 splines that I need to make. So I've got this piece of padauk that I'll use, and I'll cut 40 splines across the edge, and then we'll cut them on the bandsaw, and then everything is ready for assembly. Now, I wasn't expecting to have this pin in the center because that's not going to fit with the key that I have left here. So I'm going to just cut this out. It won't be a problem. I'm just going to cut this out using the same setup that I already have, one on each end, just the center pin.
Now everything is cut, and I've tested the fit, and now it's time to glue everything up. It's a little bit tedious with the box joint, but with a little bit of patience, you can get glue into all of the crevices. I'll clamp some 90-degree corners into two of the corners to help make sure that the box is glued up squarely. I'll clamp it up with plenty of clamps and let that sit overnight for the glue to cure. The next morning I thought I could just sand away the excess portion of the splines, but it was going to take way too long. So off camera, I used my bandsaw to cut off the splines, and then it was much easier to sand off the little bit that was remaining. So that's a good place to stop this video. That's basically how to make a center-keyed splined box joint. And in the next video, I'll show how I finished making the box.